like and subscribe. Beyond Antarctica. Chapter 5. John entered the mess hall to find Bick already up and stirring over something at the table. "Wow, Bick, you're up early," John remarked, surprised to see him so engrossed in his thoughts this early in the day. "To be honest, I haven't been to sleep," Bick confessed, gesturing towards the table where a crystal skull sat, catching the dim light of the morning. "Todd had some unique perspectives on it," he added, nodding towards the enigmatic artifact. John, more interested in starting his day with a much-needed boost, leaned over Bick to reach for the coffee pot. "You mind moving, Bick?" he asked as he poured himself a cup. Bick stepped aside, allowing John better access to the coffee station. As John reached into the cabinet below and pulled out a bottle, he added a dash of its contents to his coffee. Observing the bottle, Bick quipped, "Hey, mind if I have a dash of that creamer you use?" John looked up with a slight smile. "It's not cream, Bick." A cheerful grin appeared on Bick's face. "I realize that, John. I had a really rough night." "Yeah," John sighed. "I almost lost my girl yesterday after losing her mother last year in that car accident. I don't think I could take another loss like that." He poured a little of the bottle into Bick's coffee and re-dashed his own. Taking their seats at the table, John encouraged Bick. "Show me what you have here, Bick." As Bick recounted the story of finding the crystal skull and his theory that he wanted to test, John listened intently. "That's why I would like to send Todd back to shore before we leave, to get some mercury. I have a theory I'd like to test, but Tony and him have been up all night working on something." John chuckled softly. "Yeah, I heard them banging on things all night." Just then, Kim entered the room. "Hey, guys, have you seen that contraption on the back deck? What are they building?" John shrugged. "Heck if I know, hon. But you are the captain. Should you not know everything that goes on? It is your ship, right? Todd's been my right-hand man for over 32 years. We have an understanding. If I need to know, I will know." Kim frowned, picking up John's coffee cup and smelling it. She walked over to the sink, pouring it out. "You know what Mom said, that's not for breakfast." She then started the grill. "So, you boys want toast with your bacon?" Bick chuckles at John's situation and inquires, "So John, about the skull." That's when Kim picked up the skull, wrapped it in a towel, and tucked it into a cupboard. "That will wait until after breakfast," she declared. Then she picked up Bick's coffee cup and smelled it, then walked over to the sink and poured it out, then asked her dad, "Where do you keep your steaks?" John protested. "Not my steaks, I only have 2 left. You're not touching them." She said, "I'm making one for Tony, to thank him. Deal with it." Laughing, Bick watched their family banter with amusement. Kim sat 2 heaping plates of food in front of each of them. As Todd and Tony entered, the room filled with the scent of bacon and toast. Todd cries out, "Is that bacon I smell?" pulling up a chair next to John at the table. Tony moved to the corner of the room, with his back to the group, pouring a cup of coffee. "Tony, I'm making you a steak for breakfast. Join them at the table," she announced, directing her voice towards the quiet man who usually kept to himself. The room fell into a stunned silence, for Tony had never sat at the table nor joined in on any meals with the crew. She approached him gently, her voice soft. "Tony," she said, "you sit. I'm treating you to a steak breakfast." Tony looked up at her, a rare expression of vulnerability crossing his features. "Please," he implored, his voice almost a whisper. "I only ask one thing from people. Please treat me no differently, no worse, and for pity's sake, no better than anyone else." Lowering his head once more, he added with a hint of a smile, "But that bacon smells divine. I would be much obliged for a piece or 2. Kim smiled warmly in response. "Like everyone else, then. Tony, I would not take no from any of them. I'll treat you no different," she insisted, firmly pushing him into a chair. "Sit, sir, and eat." As she walked out, she looked back, adding, "I'll be back in 10. Leaving the room, Tony, still adjusting to the unexpected interaction, mumbled under his breath, "That's a real firecracker you have on your hands there, Captain." Bick, with a smile, "I believe she might just be the spark that ignited the fire that set off the firecracker." That's when John stated, "Yeah, There's no chance she's going back to shore, and I need everyone to back me on this." The crew nodded unanimously. Todd says, "We'll keep her safe, John. You have my word on it." The conversation then shifted as John addressed another matter that had been on his mind. "So, when are you boys going to tell me about what you're building out there?" he asked, his curiosity piqued about the mysterious construction project on the deck. Todd looked up. "So, knowing we need to save fuel, Tony rigged up makeshift sails out of bed sheets. They're not much, but as long as we don't hit heavy weather, they should hold up." Before Todd could elaborate further, John cut in with a more pressing question. "Yeah, but what is that contraption on the back of my deck?" Just as Todd was about to respond, Kim burst back into the room. "Hey, Todd, I get it. It's a steam engine, isn't it?" Todd chuckled at her enthusiasm. "Steam engine. Now that's a decent idea, but I didn't really have enough time or material to make that. However, with the scrap metal we gathered, I made a makeshift gasifier. We have a lot of lumber at our disposal, and it also floats, so it's easy to move to the ship and stack. We should save the liquid fuel for emergencies. We don't know how long it will be before we find civilization." He continued, "I melted the sword down and made a pipe to funnel the gas to the engines. If you let me, I want to go to shore and bring in some lumber to test it." John, weighing the benefits against the risks, responded thoughtfully, "I like running silent. I really do not want to draw the attention from the apex predators roaming these waters, but having speed when we need it could not hurt, especially when we hug the shoreline. Okay, Bick wants some mercury anyhow from shore, so we will sit for a few more days and gather supplies," John decided. Todd says, "You getting the mercury to test that thing we discussed about the skull last night, Bick?" "I sure am," Bick declared, as the crew discussed the technical enhancements to the celeb mariner. Kim, with a puzzled expression etched on her face, addressed her father. "Hey, Dad, my sheets are missing. All of them, even my Egyptian sheets." John, trying to keep a straight face, nodded towards Tony. "You might want to ask Tony about that," he suggested with a hint of amusement in his voice. At that moment, Tony, grabbing a piece of bacon, stood up and quietly walked out of the room. As he left, he mumbled under his breath, "I know when it's time to go." The room burst into laughter at Tony's timely exit. Kim, however, looked around, still confused by the ongoing joke. "What?" she exclaimed, her face a mask of genuine bewilderment. "I don't get it. What?" John, chuckling, grabbed a piece of bacon, stood up and said we prepare to leave for shore in a half hour, gather your things, and quickly walked out of the room, as the rest of the crew followed suit, leaving Kim all alone, in bewilderment. The morning was brisk as the crew gathered at the dinghy, ready for another expedition to the shore. John took the lead as he addressed the group, outlining the plan for the day. "Same rules as last time. 2 groups. If you hear gunfire, return immediately to the dinghy location. Understood?" A chorus of "understood" echoed back. "Okay, Tony, gather 4 guys for axe duty to aid Todd in gathering spare lumber. You watch over them with the shotgun," John instructed, ensuring that safety measures were in place. "Todd and Bick will go in to gather some mercury. No funny business, no scouting, just the mercury and back." "Understood," John added. Todd nodded. "Understood, sir." As the group finalized their preparations, Kim interjected, "Are we making multiple trips?" John shook his head. "Not unless we need to," he replied. "Then where am I going to sit?" Kim asked, a hint of frustration in her voice as she looked over at the crowded dinghy. John smiled slightly. "You noticed Bob's not here, right?" he said, which prompted Kim to scan the group, realizing Bob's absence. "Yeah, he was not feeling good this morning. He asked for you to check in on him," John continued, "and since he's not 100%, I need someone to take command on the ship until we return. That's you. If you have any questions, ask Bob. He will help you." "Dad, you're trying to sideline me again," Kim mumbled. Todd spoke up. "No, Bob is really not feeling good. I'm the one that went to check on him when he was late to roll call this morning." Kim, disappointed, nodded understandingly, recognizing the importance of her role. As they lowered the dinghy, John thanked Todd for the white lie he told Kim. Todd said no problem, but it won't last long. Bob was chowing down on that bacon she made earlier. She is not going to be happy when she finds him. Bick says, "On that note, throttle up. I want to be on the beach before that happens." The whole crew on the raft burst into laughter. Upon arriving on shore, John took a moment to ensure everything was in order for the mission ahead. The shoreline, littered with driftwood and dense foliage, provided ample resources for their needs. He glanced over his crew, all gearing up for the task at hand. "Check your gear one final time," John commanded. The crew adjusted their equipment, securing axes, ropes, and other necessary tools. "And head out," John continued, gesturing toward the dense tree line just beyond the sandy beach. "Do not be picky. Drop one tree, trim it, and section it off into 3-foot sections. Todd does not want the test logs wet, so fill the dinghy with what she will hold and send it to the ship. Unload and return. We'll float a few of the larger logs in tow with the dinghy, strap them to the side of the ship for now. We might need extra if his idea works out. Make this quick," he added, "and we can be back before dinner." The crew nodded. They dispersed quickly, axes in hand. They headed toward the trees. Meanwhile, the dinghy was prepared for its role in transporting the freshly cut logs and driftwood back to the ship. John watched them for a moment before turning his attention to Bick and Todd, telling them, "See you in a few hours." They headed out to gather mercury, a vital component for their upcoming experiments. "Hey, Todd, remember the trenches in the streets we saw yesterday?" Bick began, his voice low. "They were filled with mercury. That's our destination." "Lead the way," Todd said, readying himself for what might lie ahead. Bick, pistol in hand, guided Todd through the dense underbrush that led back to the ancient city. The city, now silent, held secrets of a bygone civilization, and the mercury-filled trenches were among its most mysterious features. As they entered the city, the sight of the trenches reaffirmed their mission. The channels cut deep into the stone pathways, winding their way through the city like metallic rivers reflecting the faint sunlight that pierced the canopy overhead. Bick crouched down beside one of the trenches, examining the liquid metal that lay dormant. "We need to gather as much as we can carry safely," he explains. Using specialized containers designed to handle hazardous materials, Bick and Todd began carefully extracting the mercury. As they worked, Bick shared his thoughts with Todd. "Think about it. This mercury was likely used for something significant by the people who built this place. Its presence here isn't accidental." Bick mused as he sealed another container. "Mercury has many uses, from gilding to medicine, but its placement here, in these trenches, leading to the pyramid, swirling around that statue holding the crystal skull, it might have been for power generation or something we haven't even considered. My mind will not stop racing on the possibilities," Bick said, wiping sweat from his brow as they loaded the last of the mercury-filled bottles into his backpack. "We've got what we came for. Let's head back." Bick and Todd maneuvered through the underbrush as they prepared to leave with their precious cargo. A sudden warning from Todd stopped Bick in his tracks. "Bick, don't move," Todd whispered. "Stare it straight in the eyes. And whatever you do, do not break eye contact." Bick turned his head slowly, his eyes widening as he caught sight of the creature lurking just a few yards away. His hand instinctively reached for his pistol, but Todd's voice halted him. "Don't move. Just stare." Bick's voice was low. "If there's one, there's more." A loud clicking noise punctuated the air, followed by a bellowing roar. The creature raised its head, then dropped it, staring intently at them again. It repeated the motion, raising and lowering its head quickly as if trying to intimidate or scare them. "That's one big raptor," Bick murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "Look closer, Bick," Todd instructed. "Stand up slowly, stay facing it, start walking backwards with me." Bick obeyed, taking a cautious step back. "What is it I'm looking at?" he asked, his gaze never leaving the creatures. "I don't think that's a raptor," Todd said. "I think that's a baby." Bick let out a disbelieving chuckle. "A baby, my ass," he replied, still inching backwards step by step. Each step was calculated to avoid startling the creature into a charge. Todd kept a watchful eye on the surroundings, half expecting the appearance of more creatures drawn by the noise by the creature's calls. Meanwhile, back at the shore, Tony looked out over the water, noting the progress. "That is 2 loads, sir," he reported to John. "The dinghy is on its way back, but Kim is on board, and she looks mad." John replied, "I don't have time for this. That girl needs to listen to orders. Have the men strap the last log onto the dinghy when she gets close, and send her back. Tell her we are wrapping up. I'll talk with her on the ship." Just as he finished his instructions, the distinct sound of gunfire pierced the air, snapping everyone's attention towards the woods. Tony, with a grave look, turned to John. "Sir, that was a gunshot," he stated, just as 4 more shots rang out in quick succession. John's face hardened. "Quick, leave that. Get Kim to the ship now," he commanded, catching the shotgun Tony tossed to him and nodding towards the crew. Tony acted swiftly, ordering the 4 other crew members onto the dinghy. "Quick, we need to drop off and get back," pushing them to move faster. As the crew scrambled to comply, the men quickly loaded into the dinghy, Kim's frustrated expression going unnoticed in the rush. She tried to protest. It fell on deaf ears. The dinghy, now heavily laden, made a swift return to the celeb mariner. As it approached, the crew quickly unloaded. Tony turned the dinghy and full-throttled back. Meanwhile, John, his grip on the shotgun tight, his eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of danger. Kim, still shaken and confused, was rushed aboard without the usual care. The logs were quickly secured and preparations were made to set sail at a moment's notice. Kim arrives on the bridge and says, "Bob, we need to ready the ship." There was gunfire. "All hands on deck," Bob bellowed. "We need to raise anchor and be ready to set sail immediately. Secure the ship and fasten all loose objects. We don't have a moment to spare." His eyes scanned the deck, ensuring every crew member sprang into action. "Fire up those engines, Kim. We might need to leave in a hurry," he directed, watching as Kim hurried to the engine controls. "Anderson, head to the anchor windlass and start hauling it up. We can't afford any delays, people." Bob's commands were crisp as he orchestrated the flurry of activity on deck. "Helmsman, plot a course for the open sea and stand ready at the wheel." He continued, "We might be navigating through rough waters, so everyone brace yourselves and secure the hatches. We leave no object unsecured." Turning to Kim, he added, "Ensure the deck is cleared for action and ready for the returning men. We need to be prepared for anything." Kim nodded, taking a quick inventory of the deck, ensuring that everything was battened down as instructed. "Move with purpose, men. Time is of the essence." Bob's voice, motivating the crew, doubling their efforts. Every line was secured, every hatch checked, and all the equipment stowed properly. It started raining hard when Tony skidded up on the beach, jumping off the dinghy as the tree line shook violently. A loud roar sounded, raising the hair on the back of John's neck. Tony stopped dead in his tracks as the trees continued to shake with ferocity. Suddenly, Todd burst from the tree line, followed by Bick, who was about 50 yards from their position. Bick turned and fired once into the tree line. At that moment, out of the foliage sprang a 10-foot creature. John started charging towards them, shotgun raised, as Bick screamed, "Get in the dinghy! Run! John, run!" As he passed him, John dropped to one knee and shot twice, dropping the beast with 2 headshots. Tony was already in the dinghy, pushed about 10 feet into the water and ready to go. John yelled, "It's good," as he turned to see Todd dive into the water. Bick, not as nimble, waded quickly towards the dinghy, yelling back, "John, hurry! That's not what I was shooting at." He shook off the rain as he stood to face the tree line. A large roar bellowed out. The trees shook, and with a surge, 2 trees toppled, revealing a T-Rex. John stood in fear, his legs locked as the giant dinosaur moved towards him, stopping to nose at the little baby Rex John had just shot in the head. Tony screamed from the dinghy, "John, move!" Snapping out of his shock, John raised his weapon and fired. The shot seemed only to upset the beast more. It raised its head and roared again, sniffing at its young. John turned and ran, then dove into the water. Bick and Todd hauled him onto the dinghy. The T-Rex turned and charged towards the water, but stopped as it reached knee-height, thrashing about in the shallow surf. Tony slammed the throttle of the dinghy as John fired 2 more rounds. "Sir, the rest are buckshot. Hold fire," Todd announces. The dinghy made a hasty retreat to the celeb mariner. The crew on the ship quickly hoisted them aboard. The T-Rex watched, its roars echoing over the sound of the rain. The T-Rex charged. John's eyes darted up to the command deck, locking with Bob's. Without needing to speak, Bob understood the gravity of the moment and barked orders across the deck. Full throttle. Get this bucket moving, boys and girls. It's payday, and the bar's just opened. The powerful beast, just yards away from the ship, began to fade into the distance, its massive form retreating back to the shore as the ship picked up speed. John, still catching his breath from the encounter, made his way to the command deck. "Follow the coast," John said. Bob turned to him. "That was a close call, sir," he remarked, watching John closely. John, removing his hat and wringing out the water, replied with a heavy sigh, "You don't even have a clue how close." Just then, Bick entered the cabin. "Sir, you will want to see this," he said, motioning towards the window. The crew gathered to look out, witnessing the T-Rex now moving up the beach in pursuit. They watched as it stopped on the beach, raised its head, and bellowed out one last roar. As the roar echoed across the water, the men in the cabin exchanged odd glances. The adrenaline of the moment had passed, and now a surreal realization set in. They had just escaped one of the most formidable predators on the planet, a creature from another era, by mere yards. John broke the silence. "Let's keep our distance from the shore for a while. No need to test our luck any further today." Bob nodded in agreement, adjusting the ship's course slightly. Kim approached John. "Dad, I want to talk with you about today," she said, her tone serious. John, visibly exhausted, managed a weary yawn. "Everyone, 6 a.m. Mess hall, don't be late," he responded, indicating the need for a team debrief first thing in the morning. As he turned to leave, he added, "I'm hitting the sack," his voice trailing off as he exited the room, leaving Kim with her thoughts until morning. This is not goodbye, nor the end. Until the story continues, my friends. B.N.Rocker.